Good morning, everybody, and I am here to talk about my September wrap up. So I look properly disheveled, as I should be, because this month was a crazy month. Like, what was the month of September? The month of September was reading, 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 no time for anything else, had 5,000 pages to get through, and it was actually a little bit below 5,000 originally, and then I recalculated when I had like the ebook count or something for one of the books that I was on, that I was reading, that I had gone with like the page count, the first page count that I found for that book, and then when I had my ebook, the page count was actually higher. So yeah, the month of September was quite something. Why did I read so much? Because of Magical Readathon. So if you don't know Magical Readathon, this is a readathon that is done twice a year. It is hosted by G from the channel Book Roast, and it is a RPG style readathon in which you play a character and you try to upgrade your character by taking classes, and that will help them along their magical career. I'm very happy to say that at the end of September my character graduated. So I don't know what that means for next installment, whether it's just like start over with a new character or whether there will be some sort of a spin that G comes up with. But so yeah, we are potentially letting go of this character. I don't think she will be continuing on her studies after this, so if there is not a spin that I'm currently not foreseeing, then this is the final time that we are playing with this character. But so, let us go over the books that I read. I will go over them chronologically speaking, I think, in terms of when I finished them throughout the month, rather than doing it subject by subject. So I will also not be talking about which book fits for which subject. I think that was in my TBR video, in case you're more interested in that. I might put it underneath the screen, but honestly, I make no promises about what editing me is going to do. But so, let's go over what I read in the month of September. And I have the books on a pile next to me, but of course they are not in that order, so let me grab out the first book. Alright, the first thing I read was Barrier Bones in the Midnight Soil by Victoria E. Schwab. So this is the Illumicrate special edition for this book. I really enjoyed this book actually. This is a vampire book, it is a sapphic vampire book, and it is a book in which we are looking at 3 different vampires, indeed, well, 3 different people and 3 different timelines, and we meet up with the oldest timeline in like, I don't know, 15th or 16th century Spain, and we kind of go through the times and meet up with the other characters, but it intersperses with some sort of flash forwards to the present day timeline and to our characters as they are then. My main qualm with this book is the fact that it's told chronologically, because that means that there's a whole lot more page counts dedicated to one character, so the character that is like 16th or whatever century Spain, because we have to make our way through the ages with her until we get to like 18th century London for meeting up with the second character, and present day for meeting up with the third character, and that means that overwhelmingly a lot of our page count is dedicated to the first character. I do feel like the first character, as a consequence, is the most fleshed out and is the one whose storyline kind of ended up being more interesting, and so that is my qualm with that, is that this leads us into a sort of like this balance between the different characters, between the different storylines. I also didn't necessarily enjoy all that much that when we then meet up with the more current timelines, we kind of have to circle back to give their backstory, rather than having us maybe go through this with 3 characters, telling the story achronologically and giving them as much weight, each one of them. But aside from that, I did really enjoy this book. It was very engaging, it was very easy to get through. I enjoyed these storylines, I enjoyed reading about these women. I enjoyed all 3 women, maybe not equally, but I enjoyed all 3 women and the stories that were brought forward with them. But ultimately, I do have some qualms with it, and it's not a perfect book, so it's also not one that like completely stole me away. But I had a very decent time with it, so definitely 4 stars, somewhere between 4 and 4.5 probably is where this one would land. Next up, I read the book probably almost in a single day or like in 24 hours or something like that, and that is Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. This is a beautiful illustrated edition for it. There are some illustrations throughout, which I really enjoyed, because I was actually listening to this one, but I was making sure that like if I was listening to it on the go, for example, that I could like look at the illustrations beforehand, so that I kind of knew the illustrations that accompanied the text when I was listening to it. So this is a Canadian classic, it's a children's classic, and it's one that I've of course heard about. I don't think you can, like, I mean, you can't go through life without hearing about it, but I definitely think it's a very popular children's classics, and so if you are in contact with English-speaking people, you will most likely have heard about this. This also has like a Netflix adaptation and stuff like that, but it is not one that like was known here when I was a child, for example, so it's definitely not something that I was exposed to within my childhood. But I did enjoy it. I found Anne to be a really annoying person, especially in like the first half of this book, but she definitely grew on me, because this is a story about a Canadian household. I think it's a brother and sister who have decided that they will adopt a child, and they basically want to adopt a boy with the idea that the boy can help out in the field, and so that, you know, the brother figure who is like getting a little bit at an older age doesn't have to do quite as much in the field, and will have somebody to help him out if he grows less able to do all the work by himself. However, when they go to the train station, a girl is there, and so they have to decide whether they're going to keep this girl, yes or no. And this girl is like a girl unlike they had anticipated. She is very talkative. She definitely breaks up the silence of the household. She's very curious, she's very imaginative, so she's always making up these stories in her head, and that kind of rubs one of the parents the wrong way, and the other one kind of secretly adores it a lot. So yeah, but I really enjoyed this one, and with Barbora from Bookworm Wonder, we are going to be reading this entire series over the coming months. So in October, if you haven't read Anne of Green Gables yet and you want to jump on, in October you can start by reading Anne of Green Gables. I will join in November when we read the sequel. The next thing I read, or like the next thing I finished, is The Expanded Earth by Mikey Please. This is a first book in a series, which was not clear from the cover or the inside. It is only at the very last page where it says the adventure continues in book 2 that it became clear to me that this was a series. This unfortunately didn't really work for me, and that's such a sad development, because I love this cover. This is like a book that I picked up without ever having heard anybody talk about it, and I was just like really excited for that reading experience, for getting to dive into a book that I didn't really know anything about, and that I mainly didn't know anybody's opinion about. Because I feel like even though I don't watch that many booktube videos anymore, I'm still pretty much on the nose with like what people are feeling about books before diving into them the majority of the time. Like, unless I'm picking up a book that's like brand new, nobody's read it yet, then I can have like my own thoughts before seeing anybody else's thoughts. But even then you have like the people who have the arcs that sometimes already like come onto your radar. So I really enjoyed that experience of getting to experience the book for the first time without anybody else like being able to give their opinion and their opinions floating around in my head. So like the pre-booktube times, I guess, like the majority of my life I was reading like this, of course, but unfortunately this book didn't end up really working for me. So this is a world in which we have, like, we're looking at 2 timelines here. We're looking at a professor in a lab who is working on a new development having to do with these sort of like teeny tiny microorganisms that live in the ocean, and that she wants to use their powers, or like she wants to experiment with these creatures. I don't actually fully remember what she was trying to achieve with her experimentation either. And then the other story arc is this man that we're following who wakes up completely shrunken at one point in time, and everybody around him is completely shrunken, and that is like the main story beat that we're following. Of course, the adventure of them trying to gather themselves in this new world where everything that previously was sort of like innocent becomes super dangerous to them, because they're so, all of a sudden they're like the size of a foot or something like that. So all of a sudden things like cats, for example, become super dangerous to them, even though before that, you know, like there was no danger, not a lot of danger that could come from a cat to a human. And the book looks at mainly this one character who is a guy who's kind of estranged from his daughters. I don't think we fully know the reason why he hasn't really had contact with his daughters, whether that is in part just like his own choice because he felt like he wasn't good enough for his daughters. We do know some other stuff as well, but he basically like wants to reach his daughters because one of his daughters, I believe, has a cochlear implant, and as a consequence, like when she grew super small, this potentially could have really harmed her, and so he wants to reach his daughters to find out what has happened to them. And throughout we also get some chapters here or there that are looking at the moments in which people shrank from a different perspective, like from somebody, for example, who is in like a space station, from a random person somewhere else on the world, and all of these things. And I've seen that be one of the criticisms, that, you know, like you never find out more about these characters. They seem to be inserted just for no reason, but I actually enjoyed that part. The part that I didn't really enjoy was the part from this guy's perspective. I didn't really find myself intrigued or engaged with that section at all, and so it actually really helped me out when like halfway through the book or something the third perspective is introduced, and that third perspective actually did interest me, and so I did kind of get more engaged with the book at that point in time. I also did like the ending of this book. There are sort of like two questions, or like one main question that's kind of asked throughout, and the answer to that is quite interesting. The next book I finished is probably the most read book of September, and that is Catabasis by R.F. Kuang. So I have once again the Illumicrate special edition. So Catabasis I enjoyed, but I didn't love. So this is a book about a descent into hell. Basically we have two doctoral thesis students who are following their professor down into hell because their professor has just passed away, and for reasons of their own they both want to descend down into hell and extract him from there in order for them to be able to continue their research rather than just accept his passing and deal with a new promoter, I guess. I mean, their reasonings are given, you know. There is an explanation given for why they want to, like why they go for this, but yeah, like simply put, we'll put it like that. And this is the sort of like their descent into hell, their journey through the different circles of hell, trying to get to the basically sort of like God figure there, so the Hades type of character, or you know, there are different names given to him based off of the different religions, and yeah, I enjoyed it. As I said, I feel like it was for me just too contemplative, maybe is what I mean. Like our main character is thinking a lot throughout this book. I felt like it was a lot of thinking, a lot of inner monologue, and not enough action or not enough dialogue. I enjoyed the dialogue the most. I think it really shines in the interactions between the main characters, but sometimes my mind just couldn't stay focused on this incessant internal monologue of our character, and I would just like drift off and like a minute later be like, alright, I'm listening to the audiobook, oh, she's still thinking, fine, I didn't miss a thing, you know. This also does have some disability representation in it, which I definitely appreciated. So it has some anxiety representation in general, and it has some Crohn's disease representation. And what I mainly loved about it is the theming of it. I just feel like in its execution it could have been like a little bit sharper, a little bit like more boiled down by having a little bit less of that inner monologue, because most of the theming is about like the harm done to students in academia, you know, like the huge pressure put on them, the infighting between students as you're basically just like fighting for like the best opportunities, the best chances. You are competing against people who are in the same situation as you, so rather than being able to have these pure friendships with them, some of those friendships get polluted because of the pressures that you're all under and the way that you're competing for the attention of the same person. And then going into different types of trauma that these characters have with this particular promoter in specific. Also looking at the sort of like harm between women in academia because of the scarcity of women in academia, how there isn't this sort of like sticking together within academia as much as you would expect, but more of a sort of like reluctance or yeah, I know the word in Dutch that I'm looking for, but like mistrust, I guess, to some extent, mistrust between the women in academia, where, you know, they don't seem to want to get too close to one another because of you know, the scarcity of that spot and kind of feeling like the other might be taking their spotlight and stuff like that. But so I enjoyed the theming of it a lot. I enjoyed the interactions between the two characters, but I must say that I did not really find myself hooked with any of the things that were happening in Hell neither. But I feel like that is mainly because there was so much thinking that the action didn't really like stand out anymore, because my mind was already kind of zoned out from all the thinking that was taking place. Alright, for the next three things I don't have a physical copy with me. So the first thing that I finished after this is Dawn by Octavia E. Butler. So this is the first book in a trilogy, and in this one we are following somebody who wakes up in a nondescript room, and she, like, the only thing that she has there is like a light sometimes and a voice, I think, that speaks to her, and she basically doesn't really know what happened to her, why she's there, what people want from her, because she's just, nobody's asking anything of her, nobody is demanding her to do anything, and soon she is encountering her captors, and things just get weirder and weirder from there. This is an alien book. I will already spoil that for you. I mean, there's not much I can say about this book if I don't get to spoil that. But I will say that I did like the atmosphere of that first little section in which you don't know what is actually going on. But this one was just very weird, which lends itself very well to book club, because this was a book for the Climates book club by Barbora from Bookworm Wonder, who I've mentioned before. And this book was weird. We had very different opinions about it, different experiences with it. There were certain sections that worked better for some, certain that worked better for others. I will say that I, in general, kind of struggled with it, but also was very interested in the thoughts that it was provoking in the subject matter. So this is very much looking at like these two different societies, these two different ways of seeing the world, of experiencing the world, and of how they would have to sort of like find a happy medium between them. But it was also interesting to me to be like, okay, is this just like a horror or not? Because this definitely lends itself to a horror interpretation, an interpretation in which there is not much agency for our character at all. And our character is also somebody who is kind of stuck in this gray zone of being our protagonist and sort of the person that we're rooting for, but also being kind of pushed into a situation or a position in which she is kind of seen as the enemy by many other humans within this world. So I thought it was an interesting one. I'm not like, I wasn't fully sold by it, I wasn't fully hooked on it. It's like a 3.5 star or something like that, but it had some really good elements to it, and mainly what it had is a lot of interesting thought-provoking stuff, and there are some elements in this that are really like groundbreaking considering the time in which this was written, and so I wouldn't mind continuing. I mean, I haven't decided yet if I'm gonna continue or not, because yeah, 3.5 star is also not like something that I enjoyed so much, but the the fact that it was so interesting does kind of make me want to continue and see what happens next, what we'll be exploring next when it comes to these different cultures and societies, especially as we are going to be looking at sort of like the next generation of this storyline. So looking at a further intermingling of these two cultures and potentially looking at sort of like mixed breeds probably who have like grown up with both cultures being normal to them and how that changes their opinions, their mindsets, their experiences. That could be really interesting to look at as well. Next up I finished Queen Bee by Juno Dawson. This is a novella. This is the prequel to the Her Majesty's Royal Coven series, so it is very much set before Her Majesty's Royal Coven series because Her Majesty's Royal Coven is more or less present day, like maybe like a few decades ago or something like that, but it's definitely like a modern world, whereas Queen Bee very much looks at the origin of the Coven, so looking at like what century is that? 17th century England, something like that probably, at the time of Henry VIII and his 6 wives, looking at the second wife, Anne Boleyn, as she is going to be the spark that ignites the creation of this coven, and it's basically looking at what comes after the beheading of Anne Boleyn, as we're following her loyal witch friends who are trying to figure out who sold Anne Boleyn out. I enjoyed it, but it's not like a favorite of mine. Like, I love Her Majesty's Royal Coven, and I think what mainly works for me in Her Majesty's Royal Coven is first of all this friendship between the women and looking at these different perspectives, whereas with this one we're mainly looking at one perspective. But also, or it felt like we were mainly looking at one perspective because we might actually get some other perspectives, but I feel like it's very like overly focused on one perspective, whereas Her Majesty's Royal Coven we're looking at 4 different perspectives, 4 modern women looking at their different experiences of witchhood, some of them embracing witchhood, some of them embracing a more like normal life and just having their witchhoods be part of them but not really practicing all that much anymore, some of them hiding stuff from their family, from their loved ones, others not, and I enjoyed that modern setting with characters who are further along in life than the typical characters that we're following when we're looking at something like an urban fantasy. So I really enjoy Her Majesty's Royal Coven a ton. I love that series, and it's not like I didn't like Queen Bee, but it just didn't fully fulfill. It didn't feel like a Her Majesty's Royal Coven book to me, so it was also just like something that I didn't necessarily want it, I didn't necessarily need. It was okay, it was enjoyable, but it's also not anything that I loved to the same level as I love the series itself. And then the next thing to talk about, that is also something I don't physically own, is the Kamigawa Food Detectives. Forgotten the author of that. This was supposed to be my book for crime, but yeah, the word detective made me think that this was going to be a crime book, and it turned out not to be, and probably I should have known that in advance. But so this is a book about a little restaurant in Kyoto, where basically if you go there you can, like, of course you can have lunch, but it's apparently very difficult to find. It's not really advertising itself all that much, except it has like one advert in a culinary magazine, which is basically telling people that if they have a certain recipe that they're looking to recreate, then they can contact the Kamigawa Food Detectives. So basically their side job is trying to recreate recipes from people's memories. So we will be following 5 or 6 stories within this book of people who have a particular recipe, most often a childhood recipe for example, that they want to recreate, and then the stories of like why they want to recreate this particular recipe, which can be, for example, there's one story of a character who has a loved one who can no longer remember things, and so they would love to kind of unlock memories through taste, and so getting that person to eat a specific recipe the way it was made all those years ago could potentially help them remember things more easily. So that's one of the examples of these stories within the book. And so we then have our detective agency will try to recreate this recipe. We don't actually see the detective work, but we get a rundown of like the different steps that they took in order to recreate this recipe, and like the different ingredients needed to recreate it exactly the way that it was made. For example, they'll be like, yeah, your mother always went to this particular grocery store to get these types of noodles, so and then like the water there has a, like the water from where you were from has a slightly different, has a impact on these noodles, so like we brought that water and stuff like that. I thought it was wholesome, I enjoyed it. It's one of these healing fictions that are very prevalent coming out of Japanese literature, and it was slightly different from most other healing fictions to the extent that I still enjoyed it, because I feel like a lot of times I feel like it's too formulaic, and so I no longer can really enjoy it, because one of the things that I really enjoy in literature, or that I really appreciate in literature, is innovation, is kind of doing something new, or just kind of like upsetting my expectations of something. And I wouldn't necessarily say that I can tell you why it's new. Maybe it's just the fact that it's done in a different way than the others, with this whole idea of like recreating recipes. I think I just really appreciated this sort of like appreciation and meticulousness in the pursuit of these memories, in the appreciation for ingredients and the quality of ingredients, and the sentimentality behind memory and food, and the interconnection between food and your memories, and food and your upbringing, your culture, and the person that you are. And food as more than just a sustenance for your body, but also sustenance for your soul. I think that aspect really worked, and I tend to enjoy that within literature that talks about food, and so this combination of a culinary book in combination with a healing fiction really worked for what I pretend to enjoy, or what I've enjoyed in the past. So making this a healing fiction that once again worked for me, compared to some of the more recent healing fiction that I've been reading, where I've just felt like, I get what we were doing, but you know, I've read others within the genre that have done it better for me. Alright, next book that I finished, speaking of culinary, is 7 Recipes for Revolution by Ryan Rose. This is a revolution in the kitchen type of book. I don't really think it works for the hard mode for her yet after all, but so basically we are looking at a society in which there are these massive bull-like creatures, and basically their flesh can provide healing powers if cooked in a certain way. And so these recipes that can give these sort of like greater powers are called greater recipes. And our protagonist is basically a butcher at the beginning of the book, and he is basically harvesting this meat. Not a lovely scene at the beginning of the book, because basically they cut off these pieces of flesh from this bull while it's alive, and then it regrows this flesh, but of course it is in a lot of pain while this is taking place. But his big wish is to be able to go to the Culinary Academy. However, this is what is very much is a segregated society, and only the ones who are kind of, I've forgotten what the name is for like the upper classes, but only the upper classes have easy access to this Culinary Academy. If you are not from the upper classes, the only way to really get in is by creating a greater recipe, which of course somebody in a lower part of society will have almost no access to, because they don't even have access to the ingredients unless you smuggle them out of the butchery. But so I really enjoyed this one a lot. This one also has like recipes intermixed within the book. I didn't end up reading many of the recipes because but I did enjoy like the touch of adding the recipes to it. I loved the sort of like descriptions of food, of smells and things like that are interlaced within this story as well. And in general it is a revolution story, as the title suggests, of trying to break these class barriers, but also he's very early on kind of approached by rebels, because he through circumstances becomes quite famous within this world. and he is now in a position where he can, you know, like have an impact. He's a figure from a lower class making it into a position that normally they don't get to be in. So of course he's an interesting figure for the rebels, both as a sort of like figurehead for the movement, but also as somebody with access to a society that they would like to learn more from and that they would like to break down the barriers to. I enjoyed this one a lot. This is told as a frame story, so it's told from a future perspective, and our future perspective is also beyond the boundaries of this first book. So I think potentially in the second book we'll catch up to the storyline where we're at the very first chapter, or maybe only in the third one, but somehow there's a lot of crimes that our protagonist has committed, and so we'll be figuring out some more of these within later books, I assume. Next up, I finished Green Dot by Madeline Gray. This is a cover by. This cover spoke to me, and I did really enjoy this book, in spite of the fact that it is actually a book about an affair. I was completely hooked at the very beginning. I love the writing style that Madeline Gray uses within this book. So this is a book about office life. It seems like at the very beginning this is like a character who very much has enjoyed her childhood and has enjoyed studying, but she doesn't really have any interest in a real life job. However, of course, money speaking, she needs a real job. She needs something to sustain her lifestyle. So she ends up getting a regular 9-to-5, and her descriptions of like 9-to-5 life, office life are just very funny for somebody who does a 9-to-5 job. But along the way she has a connection with somebody in the office, and so she starts dating this person, but it turns out that he is already married. And that makes this book really frustrating at times. I mean, it's intended to be, but like the back and forth between these characters, the way in which she's kind of hiding this relationship to some extent. I mean, she's definitely hiding it from her co-workers, for example, but also towards her friends. She isn't always being forthright about the fact that she is dating a married man. The self-esteem issues that occur out of this relationship and the way that she has to kind of hide it, like they are very aggravating, and the way that she keeps on kind of like hoping for a change in this relationship, hoping for him to leave his wife, that all of that at a certain point just really started to be like, girl, leave him, leave this dude, she's never gonna leave her, stop waiting for this to happen. But ultimately the fact that I felt so strongly about it as well also means that it is like very well written, that like you are very much sucked in, engaged with this storyline. So I really enjoyed it. I would look forward to something else by Madeline Gray that is probably more suited to my interests, because like stories about an affair, they don't really interest me all that much. That's why I said it's a cover by. I probably knew it was a book about an affair, because even with cover buys I do read the back, you know, of the book. It's not like I don't read, like I purely buy for the cover. So I did read the back. The sort of like positive reviews for it are what convinced me to overlook that. But yes, I will definitely say that I will be happy to read something else by Madeline Gray, hopefully with a subject matter that interests me more, because I do definitely think that I love her writing style a whole lot. And then, is this gonna be the final thing? No, there are a few more. Whoa. Next up, I read Universality by Natasha Brown. I did not like this book. This book I read for the Booker Prize. It did not make the shortlist. Very happy for that. This is a book that takes place in like 4 parts, I think. The first part is a reproduction of an article about the theft of a gold bar that somebody used to kind of basically almost kill somebody else. I think that part was really strong. I would have loved it if it was just that. Because the writing in that article was very well. It read very quickly, fluently. This is a very short book, but after that, the three other sections, they were a slog to get through. Basically, after that, we have a section in which we follow the author of the article, and then the other sections we follow other people that are somehow connected to this story. And those sections, it was just difficult to get through. A lot of this is about like wokeness, anti-wokeness, and whatever, but ultimately speaking, for me, this book did nothing in terms of discussing wokeness, anti-wokeness, and the sentiments around it, and the people who feel one way or the other. It did nothing for me, okay? So I did not enjoy this book at all. Then I finished Two Like the Lightning by Ava Palmer. This is the first book in the Terra Ignota series. This is a difficult series to talk about. It is a sci-fi series. We're looking at a character who's basically a sort of like religious expert who you can consult in case of existential crises, spiritual crises, and so he is called into this one particular family because their previous expert has just passed away, and so this is a delicate time in which the organization behind these people definitely wants to support them even further. However, when he arrives there, he hears some things through the door that makes him think that there's some sort of a crisis happening, even though the people on the other side are like, yeah, can you come back another time? Like, we don't need you right now. But he forces his way in, through circumstances. The door opens for him, and he meets a scene that is quite unlike any other, because he finds like a group of toy soldiers that have been brought to life, that have just been, like most of them have just been massacred. That is all I'm gonna say. This is a story with a very specific type of writing. It very much reads old-fashioned, but it has a very quirky, modern, hectic pace to it, and that combination I find very interesting. Our protagonist is not this expert on religion, but he is somebody very close to the drama of this world, because there's a big plot involving a sort of like list of the most important people within the society that is produced every single year, and that list has basically been stolen and tampered with, and so there's a big plot going on with like the repercussions of this altered list and what that could mean for the dynamics between the different parts of this world. I enjoyed this book a lot. It talks about different philosophical themes, mostly. It has a very interesting world building, because at some point in the history of this world they stepped away from the idea of the nation as sort of like the grouping principle between people, and so there were these different groups that established itself, and that you can like kind of like identify yourself as being part of that group based on their values and the way that their rules and stuff like that. And you know, like, I love the world building. I loved how our protagonist is like basically has like a foot in every single household, because he is somebody who's help you can kind of solicit, can call into. You can hire him for all sorts of things, and he's just like involved in everything that's going on in this world, even though he's supposed to be just like somebody in servitude to others, who some sort of a person that most people would consider like a lowly person with no impact, except he has impact everywhere. And I love the style of it. It was quite confusing, especially in the beginning, and so I do feel like I was lost. Even at the end, there were definitely a lot of times in which I was like, wait, well, you lost me again. But I definitely do think that it's a great one, and I did appreciate it for the most part. I loved it for a lot of it as well, so I'm very eager to continue on. Alright, camera battery was overheating, so I had to stop that clip. But so I was talking about Misinterpretation. So Misinterpretation is a book about a Albanian interpreter translator who takes on a new client who basically wants her help interpreting during his therapy sessions. Now the book is about not that many things to some extent. It doesn't really have a clear sense of direction, I would say. Very vibey as well. A lot of the early sections seem to be about this sort of like conflict between her and her husband, where they seem to have kind of grown apart, a little bit estranged from one another, and that's not really something that interests me all that much. However, there is a sort of like turning point towards the second half, where there's a lot sort of like more thrilling aspects to the storyline, a little bit like Albanian mafia vibes going on at some point as well. And then I was much, like with that section, I was really engaged. So in general, I would say like this is a book that I read for the Booker Prize. It didn't make it onto the shortlist, but it definitely is like much more of a success story than Universality was, and I definitely could see like there were definitely parts of it where I was seeing the value, the worth in it, and I was very much like on board for it. But on the whole, it's just like not a book that's fully worked for me, and like if it weren't for the Booker Prize, I would probably have like skipped out on it pretty soon. It was much easier to get through than Universality had been, for example, so I definitely did feel like the pages were going by much faster than they were for Universality, so I didn't really have any issue with going through it, though I also didn't have any intrigue to push me into the next chapter, for example. So I definitely had to like consciously continue on reading in it without like having any sort of impulse coming from the story itself, up until we got to that point later on within the book in which I did like have that sort of like self interest that propelled me further. And then the final book for the month of September is Grave Empire by Richard Swan. So this is the first in a new series, but it is set, I think, in the same world as his other series, which started with the Justice of Kings. His other series, which I DNF'd. So the other series were following like a, like, you know, like somebody in the legal profession traveling around in this land and like judging cases, I think. But so that was very much like crime novel type of vibes, which I don't care about, and so that book I gave up on it pretty quickly. It was also at a time in which I was just like focused on other things, so perhaps I didn't give it as much of a chance as it potentially deserved, but maybe one day I'll go back to it, because Grave Empire I actually really enjoyed. So in Grave Empire we are following mainly two perspectives. One is a soldier who is sent off to a sort of like fortress at like the edge of the map, let's say, like a very remote fortress that he has to take on a captaincy in. And he has so far been kind of struggling with his career. He was really, he had like a promising career that like all of a sudden kind of fell away. And so now he's going off to the middle of nowhere, very close to the edge of where there's a war going on. And on his way there, he stumbles upon the corpses of 4 soldiers who seem to have been sort of like disemboweled. His storyline will have a lot of sort of like weird, spooky, eerie things going on at that fortress, like howling sounds, screaming sounds in the night that nobody really knows where they're coming from. And so a lot of his storyline will be kind of trying to figure out what is actually happening there. And then the second main perspective that we're following is of a female diplomat who is, she's like trained or like specialized in this society of sea beings. I forgot their name, but so basically she has been whiling away in the basement of the ministry, more or less, because nobody's ever really interested in reaching out to these people. And so she is like fully prepared to one day go there, but she's never actually met anybody from the race that she's specialized in. And then we kind of follow her as an opportunity starts to arise. And then there is also a third character that we are following, but to a lesser degree, who is this sort of like Duke who has stumbled upon a secret that he's trying to unravel a little bit. But so yeah, this one is very dark, atmospheric, gloomy. So the secrets that are going on sometimes kind of gave me sort of like Walking Dead vibes or Monster of Frankenstein sort of vibes. Very much in keeping with this season, so it would be a perfect read for right around now, like a creepy horror fantasy type almost. And yeah, I just really enjoyed this atmosphere. It read really quickly in my opinion, and so I'm very much looking forward to continuing on with this series when the next installment comes out. But so yeah, those were the books. That's everything that I read in the month of September. I had my best reading month ever. I read over 5,000 pages and I read 13 books I think in the month of September. I did still read part of another book when I finished with that one. So I finished with that one like, and I had 2 days left in the month, so I did still start another book, but I didn't finish that one in September, so that one is gonna be on the October wrap up. But so yeah, with that I'm gonna wrap up this video and I hope you guys enjoyed it and see you guys for the next one. Bye!